All right. Rick said, my name's Ross Templeton. I'm with the Ironworkers. I'm here to talk about infrastructure, here to talk about CHIPS and Science Act, Inflation Reduction Act, all of the legislation that we've won and now we're trying to put into practice as a way to grow our unions. Before I jump into that, I do want to congratulate Rick on the election and nomination. And also I want to recognize that Texas AFL-CIO really is respected around the country as one of the most effective state federations of labor anywhere that's been able to accomplish so much in the case of so much adversity and is looked at as a model in so many places. And that's Rick's leadership. It's also the hard work of his staff. We've all seen them running around all over the place this week, turning all sorts of chaos that gets thrown at them into a fantastic convention. So really, before I start, I want to ask everyone to give a round of applause for the staff of Texas AFL. Great job. So, that's good. All right, thank you. That concludes my report. Appreciate it. So, I want to start out here by saying, the bipartisan infrastructure law and all this other legislation, it's talked about a fair amount, and people always talk about it as historic infrastructure investments, historic opportunities. We throw around the word historic a lot, but we don't usually think about what that means. And days like this, where we're at an AFL convention, that allows us to really give ourselves an example of the importance of history and historic events. For over a century, union activists, union members have been meeting in conventions and meetings like this in order to drive our movement forward. These are the people who built our unions, who built our federation. Everything we have was handed to us, and we're going to have to hand it along in the future. And that's something that should always motivate us and recognize that that's our guidance going forward. These folks weren't giants. They weren't superheroes. They were folks just like us who recognized their moment and rose to meet it. Sometimes that means playing defense, and in Texas, no one's a stranger to that. My home state of Florida, same deal. I always remember the words of the great Marvin Ragsdale, ironworker of Texas, who gave me a saying from his father, protect the organization. And it's that attitude, that slogan that's taken us through a lot of tough times. But part of this is also recognizing the moments of opportunity, where we can lean forward, where we can play offense, and we can grow and become strong. Again, almost 100 years ago, union members just like us were faced with the opportunities and challenges of the Great Depression, World War II, and the New Deal. And the work that they did then is what created the unions that we inherit today. We now have that same opportunity with this legislation if we're able to rise up and meet it. Now I got a slideshow presentation. Not sure if we can get that up on the piece, but I do want to draw attention to this picture right here. This is the signing of the bipartisan infrastructure law. When I look at this, the thing that stands out to me is there are more labor leaders up on that stage than there are U.S. senators. That's important. Right? Now, that wasn't an accident, that's deliberate. That is a very visible symbol of Joe Biden's commitment to the labor movement. It's also sending a message to every state, every company, every one of these entities that wants to lean in and get some of this infrastructure dollars and build their projects, what the expectation of the jobs is supposed to be. This has been crystal clear from the beginning that these are meant to be union jobs in construction, operations, industrial, all of that. And every step along the way, the White House has gone out of its way to put that front and center, to make that visible. And I want every one of us to think about throughout this conversation today, and as we go out and start organizing around this work, these are not things that are handed to us, these are things we earned. Bipartisan infrastructure law and the rest of this, these are union achievements. We should be proud of them, and we should recognize that finishing the job means going out and seizing the work that we helped to create. We can go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So, reference three pieces of legislation that were meant to solve some serious problems facing our country. Our infrastructure's been crumbling. We have roads and bridges that aren't up to the task. Everybody's familiar with that, getting worse and worse as time goes on. Public transit systems that have been disinvested over and over by anti-union governments trying to privatize and push folks down. And also a manufacturing center that's been absolutely carved out. Jobs shipped overseas and companies using that pressure in order to depress wages and undermine union contracts. In addition, there's the problem that we all face, climate change. It's coming, it's here. We can feel it on summer days like this. And inaction is going to destroy the economy and make it impossible for any of us to go to work. But at the same time, the rising clean energy developers are just like the oil barons of old, interested in building things as cheap as possible with no labor protections, no unions. And they have for decades tried to build a renewable energy industry that goes to the bottom dollar. All imported products, and all work that's done by non-union folks in terrible conditions. This legislation is truly a historic set of tools that we have in order to fix those problems. On infrastructure, our crumbling infrastructure, we were able to fix it with the bipartisan infrastructure law. This was passed by Republicans and Democrats. We needed votes in both houses of Congress in order to get it done. It's a testament to the acumen, the legislative acumen of both this administration and the hard work lobbying that every single union did in order to get this thing passed. But it invests $1.2 trillion into the infrastructure economy across everything. The scale of this really is incredible. This is as much money put into roads and bridges, a highway fund, as all previous highway bills over the last 20 years combined. But on top of that, it's other modes of transportation. It's airports, it's public transit, it's rail, and then it's also water infrastructure as well. Fixing the Flint, Michigans of the world. Flint made the news, but we know that there's hundreds of Flint, Michigans across the country where the pipes need replacing. All of this is in there, and it really puts the weight in a lot of these other modes of transportation. In addition, the bipartisan infrastructure law is the strongest labor standards in history. Improved Davis-Bacon prevailing wage. New programs that give the government the freedom to put money where it needs to go to create good jobs. Improved resources for apprenticeship. These are all very, very powerful tools, and the legislation we won gives us the ability to do that. Also, CHIPS and Science Act. I know folks in Texas are no strangers to semiconductor factories. These are the largest manufacturing facilities in the world, and they're going up all over the country. Many of these companies would prefer to build them non-union, and many of them are. But the CHIPS and Science Act, for the first time, is attaching Davis-Bacon prevailing wage to those grants that are going out to these companies in order to make sure that these are creating union jobs. And in addition, the administration is working on many ways alongside industrial unions to make sure that these are union shops once these projects are done. And on top of that, we have the Inflation Reduction Act. Huge consequential piece of legislation. This is the largest climate change bill in human history. This beats anything that any other country has done, and it does it the right way. Hundreds of billions of dollars, there's really no cap on it, in tax benefits for clean energy across all sorts of different types, whether it's wind and solar, what a lot of people think of, but also hydrogen, advanced nuclear, and manufacturing around electric vehicles and batteries. This is backed up by strong labor standards. We fought for decades with the barons of the wind and solar industry, who again wanted to fight any sort of standards on government spending that was on these tax credits that built their entire industry. We fought, we lost, cycle after cycle. Joe Biden comes into office. We won. We now have Davis-Bacon prevailing wage on these tax credits for clean energy. We have apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship, union apprenticeship utilization on these credits as well. That's all built into the law. And on top of that, there's additional tools, mechanisms inside this legislation that further helps us make sure these are good union jobs. And across all of this, we have vastly expanded use of Buy American provisions, which these laws have been in the books for a very long time, but they're full of so many holes that any agency or company that wants to get around them has been able to do it. This administration, at the urging and at the pushing of the labor movement, has hugely beefed this up with stronger standards in the legislation and new rules and regulations and staff devoted to making sure that this stuff is actually built in the United States. So that's our legislation. Next slide, please. So, all right, yeah, let's do it. And again, it's a huge accomplishment, but there's always the next step, because you can have the best legislation in the world. If the administration doesn't want to implement it the right way, it's not going to do us any good. So we have the benefit of these executive orders. This is Crenita Jordan. She's an iron worker, a union iron worker, who's introducing President Biden as he signs an executive order on encouraging project labor agreements across the federal government. These executive orders are kind of the marching orders, the guidance for all of these agencies as they put things into practice. There's a project labor agreement executive order. There's an executive order on worker empowerment and organizing that specifically directs all of these programs to do everything they can to encourage unionization and build power. And on top of that, there are executive orders for each of these laws that further encourages things to go in a union direction. So there is a push from the top in order to make sure it's implemented correctly. Next slide, please. On top of that, we face the problem always of governors that don't want to play along. Again, I know Texas is familiar with this. A lot of money from this legislation goes directly to states, but on top of that, there are discretionary programs where agencies like Department of Transportation, Department of Energy get to give this money directly to applicants, whether those are cities or companies. If these are pro-union cities or pro-union companies where we have a relationship, we can get there on the ground floor and bypass folks who are trying to block us. On top of that, these programs, these discretionary programs, have been built around the idea of encouraging labor utilization. If an applicant is going to use a project labor agreement, an applicant is going to use registered apprentices or have a neutrality agreement for the industrial workers, that bumps them up in their applications. And this applies across the board. It's an incredibly powerful tool for us to get on the ground floor of these projects. Next slide, please. But again, even with these executive orders and rules, it's up to us to actually do the work. And that's where things get tricky, and that's where things get tough, because there's a lot of programs that we have to track with. Good news is that I think that labor is succeeding. And with continued engagement by folks in this room, we can continue to get it done. We need to be out there speaking to potential applicants, talking to our counties, talking to our cities, saying this bridge that we've been trying to rebuild forever, this airport that needs a new terminal expansion, let us work with you as you ask the federal government for these grants and programs to help increase your chances. This has been successful. We're in the second year round of discretionary grants going up. We've seen a large increase in project labor agreements, labor standards across the board with these things. And it's a very successful model. But we need to be having these conversations with applicants directly. And we need to recognize the barriers to it. There are companies that don't want to use unions. There are states that don't want to use unions. So we need to overcome resistance in some cases. We got to find ways to do a good sell in some cases. And we need to be working very closely. The best tool that we have in a lot of cases is directly communicating to the administration. We can send in a letter in support or opposition of an application, and that's used as evidence for or against that project being good for union jobs or workers in general. On top of that, utilizing relationships with elected officials. Even if they aren't making the decision at DOT who gets the money, they can be helpful. I want to recognize the work of Greg Casar, who's been in Congress for, you guys elected him. He has done more for labor in 6 months than most politicians in D.C. do their whole careers. He has launched a screening tool for his fellow members of Congress when there are infrastructure projects in their area to evaluate whether it's going to be good for jobs, good for the community. If he's going to be here tonight, thank him. We don't always thank people for doing the right thing, and ask how you can help get members of the Texas delegation in your area on board with this huge tool, and he's done great work, and I appreciate him for it. Final slide, if you don't mind. So this is my contact. I have this presentation. I go around, talk to meetings of elected officials, county folks, state folks, whatever, give them all this information, let them know how important it is to work with unions on these things, how it can benefit them. Anyone here is absolutely welcome to give me a call. We've worked with governors on multi-billion-dollar bridges. We've worked with counties on little bike paths. Even if there's not a ton of ironwork in it, I'm happy to talk to you, try to point you in the right direction, and find ways that you can work with your international staff at your affiliates and get this stuff done the right way. We really we are not going to succeed as individual unions on this. We have to be able to work together as a movement. We need to communicate across trades and industrial and public sector lines, and we have to rely on the great shared resources like the Texas AFL-CIO, Texas Climate Jobs Program, in order to get that done. But I am absolutely convinced that this is our moment, and we're going to be able to meet that. And with that, I want to thank everybody and invite the next panel up on stage. Thank you.